Seeing that it is 6:30, we will begin the organizational meeting for this evening.
Chatty Cathy over there.
I will act as temporary chair as we say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All members are present this evening, with the exception of Ben Hansen. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved.
By Stacy. Do I have a second for that motion? Or by Lee, excuse me. Do I have a second for that motion? By Todd. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda is the election of the officer. As acting chair, I will ask for nominations for the positions of chair, vice chair / clerk, and for treasurer. And there are no seconds needed. And they do not require, and a vote for each position will be made public, and the newly elected chair will take over the meeting immediately following his or her election. So, do I have any nominations for the chair?
I have a nomination for Rich Wolf as chair.
Okay. Do I have any other nominations? And do I have, one last time, any other nominations? Seeing no other nominations, all those signify by saying for the election of myself as chair, signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, that passes 6-0. Next on the agenda is the election of the vice chair clerk. Are there any nominations for the position of vice chair and clerk? I will nominate Lee for the vice chair clerk position. Do I have any other nominations? One last time, do I have any other nominations for the vice chair clerk position? Seeing none, all those in favor of Lee as the vice chair clerk signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Next is for the treasurer position. Do I have a nomination for the treasurer position?
I'd like to nominate Stacy Ruel.
Stacy Ruel has been nominated. Do I have any other nominations? And one last time, are there any other nominations for treasurer? With that, all those in favor for Stacy as the treasurer signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. The following consent agenda items require board approval tonight. And I'm going to go through these, each one individual. We'll designate the depositories for school district funds with Klein Bank, U.S. Bank of Prior Lake, Wells Fargo Bank, Commerce Bank, Minnesota School District Liquid Asset Fund, and the PMA Financial Network. We designate the official school district newspaper as the Prior Lake American of Prior Lake and the Savage Pacer of Savage, Minnesota as the official school district legal newspapers. We'll designate school district financial consultants as Ehlers and Associates as our district financial consultants. Our school district legal counsel, the law firms of Knutson, Flynn, Deans, Rotwick, Rozak, and Maloney, PA, Rupp, Anderson, Squires, and Walsberger, PA, and the Grell, Feist, Prince, PLC as our school district legal counsel. The district auditing firm is Clifton Larson Allen, LLP. We will name the assistant board clerk as Ms. Julie Sink, Executive Director of Business Services, to perform the clerical duties of the board clerk pursuant to Minnesota Statute 123B.14, and shall be named assistant board clerk. We authorize persons to lease, purchase, contract for goods and services within the budget. We authorize Dr. Terry Stallo, Superintendent of Schools, and Ms. Julie Sink, Executive Director of Business Service, to lease, purchase, and contract for goods and services within the budget as approved by the school board, provided that any transaction in an amount exceeding a minimum amount for which bids are required must first be authorized by the board. We also designate the school district special education director, federal programs coordinator, and district LEA and ESEA programs, and data practices compliance officer. Will designate Deborah Anderson as the school district's special education director, Mr. Jeff Holmberg as the school district's federal programs coordinator, and Mr. Jeff Holmberg as district LEA ESEA program, and Mr. Matt Mons as data practices compliance officer. Will delegate Ms. Julie Sink, Executive Director of Business Services, the authority to make electronic transfers, and in addition, the appropriate documentation, including written confirmation from the financial institution and proper request and approval form for the transfer. And those records shall be retained by the Executive Director of Business Services, and will direct the administration to publish notification in the official district newspapers, and direct the administration to publish the annual notification of rights, protection, and privacy of student records in the official newspapers of the district. So those items are on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So made.
By Stacy. Do I have a second?
I have a motion to
The consent agenda,
To amend the consent agenda?
that should have been done prior to the meeting
When we approve the agenda.
when they approved the agenda.
I thought we were approving the details as part of the consent agenda.
No, the consent agenda has items that are not up for discussion. So if you wanted something removed from the consent agenda prior to the meeting and the approval of the agenda is when you request that that item be taken off the consent agenda. And
I had a motion to add to the consent agenda.
why don't, because the consent agenda is not up for addition or subtraction, why don't you make a motion after the consent agenda
Okay.
for additional items, and then we'll go from there. I have a motion for the, do I have a second for the consent agenda?
Second.
By Todd. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda is the board compensation. Before we enter 7, Mary, would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we add to the consent agenda the detailed disbursements reports for check, wire, and cash transfers. And to add to the consent agenda going into the construction season, the construction finance reports also.
I'm going to call point of order on here, as far as
Good,
we haven't
Stacy.
had any discussion at all about this. And so bringing it forward right now in a meeting isn't really appropriate without discussion.
Would that be, okay, so I have a motion and a point of order. So first we have to act on the point of order, right? And it's a majority vote on that. Right? Give me
Well,
just 1 second.
I guess my understanding is that if we wanted to make any changes to anything on
Our
our
point
agenda
of order
tonight,
is-
it needed to be done
Yeah.
during the approval of the agenda.
Right.
Once we move forward, what's on the agenda is, especially the consent agenda, does not change. So I think it all is out of order
Right.
at this point.
It's a point of order.
All right.
So I don't think there's, I mean,
So the point of order does not need a second and is not amendable or debatable. So,
yeah, it's a point of order. It's not
yeah,
a
and
vote.
it needs a majority vote, or it needs none, excuse me. So, all right. All right, so point of order is end of discussion, right? So I think, do I have a second for Mary's?
I don't even
Okay.
think you discussed
Okay,
that.
no second for that, so we will move that, and then I would suggest to Mary to follow up with administration, and maybe we can add that to the board study session coming up here in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay, let the board discuss that. Next on the agenda is the board compensation. This is where the board chair recommends appropriate compensation prior to board action. The current compensation for 2017 is as follows, as you can see on the agenda itself. So I will make a motion for discussion, because I'd like to have a little bit of discussion here. I will make a motion that compensation for school board members be increased to $6,000 per year for each school board members, but the per dollar meeting, or per dollar stipend for each of the meetings remains the same. So that's my motion. Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
All right, so I have a first and a second. And I will speak to why I made that motion. On the last meeting we had last year in December, I compiled some data on what other stipends are for school districts around the state and close to us. And you saw from that, each of you got that report. Burnsville is currently about $6,000. Lakeville, now this is last year in 2017. Lakeville is $6,700. Bloomington is $7,200 for each of the school board members. Shakopee is $5,000. And then Rosemount Apple Valley is $6,200, and we are currently at $5,000. The compensation for school board members has not been increased since 2014. So I guess I'd like a little discussion among the board and see how we feel about that.
Can I ask a point of clarification?
Sure.
I understood you to say, just to make sure I understood it, that you're asking for the actual per year amount be raised to 6,000, but the amount per meeting for the committee assignments and all the other criteria remain the same.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there any discussion?
I think
Go ahead,
you're
Todd.
in line, Rich, with what should be done. I know it's been since 2014, and to attract candidates coming up and to continue with that, I believe that we should raise the rate. One question I may have is the board chair possibly, I know, has not been raised in at least since we've been on the board. And I know the work behind that. I know the clerk treasurer and the other time allotment committed to setting agendas and setting stuff up. And so I'd like to recommend that that be increased to 500 for the chair and $300 for each of the other positions.
So is that a motion then, Todd?
Yes, it is.
All right. Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. That's a second from Stacy.
Is there any information that we have about how these numbers are actually derived? Or is it just a,
Martha compiled these numbers, and most of these are either from what is self-reported on their websites or from the MSBA, I believe.
does the MSBA indicate
I don't.
how they
double
came
check.
up with the general amount?
Oh, I don't think so.
No. No, MSBA just coagulates the data, puts it together, and they rely on the self-reporting of each of the boards and the districts. Any other discussion?
No, I mean, I'd support this. I think just from the standpoint of, if someone, I always look at it, if someone had young kids and had to have a babysitter, the amount of hours put in, that, I think that has to be a factor too, that it's not detrimental to someone to serve on the board. If they have to watch their children or have someone watch their children at home. So, I think it's something that we haven't changed in quite a few years, and it just seems like it would keep us in line with similar districts and similar sizes.
I have no feelings one way or the other. Personally, I consider this a, more altruistic than anything else. So and I don't have young kids at home either. But I've never considered the amount that a board member was compensated as an incentive to be on a board. So I don't necessarily agree with the reasoning. However, and I don't know how the numbers originally derived. So I'm fine with it staying the same.
Yeah, Melissa?
At this point, I'd consider not supporting that increase in the compensation for two factors. First of all, considering issues and results that we've had in 2016 and 17. And secondly, we haven't had any issue attracting candidates in the last election. We had an abundance. So I would say that that would not be an issue either, and that we are in line with other districts according to Martha's research, which I appreciate.
Any other?
Moment.
Lee?
My comment would be that there's not been an increase in a number of years for school board members and officers. I don't remember there ever being an increase for officers, actually, in quite a few years. So I think it's time that we get more in line with the school districts in our area that we're competitive with in the other districts. So I would support this. And I also do agree with Stacy in that if you're in a volunteer position, it shouldn't cost you that much money to be in a volunteer position. Now, most of us probably don't have kids that we have to worry about with sitters, but there's other costs involved with being on the board. And I think it's, it doesn't compare, whatever we get doesn't compare to the amount of time that we put in. But it's something. So I guess I support your motion
Okay.
and yours, Todd.
Any other comments? I will just say as a closing comment, my goal here is to make sure that we make this position attractive, especially to young parents who have students in the district, and we have 4 board positions coming up in 2018. So part of my goal here is to make sure that we are competitive with other districts and make these positions attractive. So, any other discussion? So on the table right now is a motion from Todd, a secondary motion, that the compensation is increased to $6,000 per year, and the board chair with an additional $500, and the clerk treasurer, and vice chair clerk and the treasurer are each increased from $200 to $300. So I have that motion, and it's seconded. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
That passes 4-2. All right. All right, so, and then, all right, next on the agenda is the approval of the board committee assignments for 2018. As board chair, I would like to keep the committee assignments the same, with the note that, and a reminder that no decisions are made at committee meetings. All decisions, final decisions, are made by the board in the presence of a quorum, and remind board members that any board member is allowed to attend any committee meeting they wish. Though if the 3 board members are present, that extra board member acts as an observational role. So with that, I'm going to keep the board committee meetings assignments as they are for this year. It seemed to work pretty well last year, so we'll continue to do it that way. Next on the agenda is the discussion of the meeting procedure. Oh,
Yeah, we have to approve them.
okay, yes, thank you, Lee. We need a motion for the approval of the board committee assignments for 2018. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
By Todd, do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
That is Stacy. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda, number 9, is a discussion of meeting procedures and formats. Right now, we're requested to discuss how the meetings and procedure format in terms of the board administrative reports, new business, meeting locations, start times, handouts, agendas. You see them there. Normally, we hold 1 regular board meeting and 1 study session per month. we'll continue with that unless I hear and have a motion otherwise. So I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion or just have a general discussion.
Rich, I do have
Go
one
ahead,
discussion
Mary.
point. In a lot of our study sessions, we've saved the comments and the speakers on the agenda till the end, although I think you've been generous in allowing people to speak up front. Is there a way that we can make sure that the way we conduct our study sessions going forward has any speakers come up front, come in the beginning of the meeting? Do our board meetings we do have, and it specifically states in here, but a lot of our agendas for the study sessions have left them to the end.
Okay, so what you're recommending is on a topic that a member of the public would like to address, you'd like that to happen after the discussion of the board or at the beginning of the board meeting?
At the beginning of the study sessions. Right now, the board meetings do say that at least 10 minutes prior, people sign up, but in the study sessions in the agenda, we've left any open or public comments to the end of the actual agenda, and I'd like to move that to the front so people feel more encouraged to come forward, especially during a study session.
Go ahead, Stacy.
When this was originally set up with Dennis and we were doing our work in governance, the idea behind the study sessions was the public comment portion where people come for any for the item to speak in front of the board is the official board meeting. But on the study session, the idea was for them to listen to what was happening and the discussion, and then only speak on those items that are pertinent to that study session. So there isn't a way, so the comments are pertaining to what we work on that evening and the discussion. So for them to have a comment before we have the discussion doesn't seem to, that's kind of how that's how it was set up. Because if they're gonna make a public comment about something, they would come to the general board meeting and do it at the open forum session. And it wasn't really an open forum. I mean, that wasn't how, it was basically public comment at the end of how of our work was done during the study session. And so, you know, the comment could be, oh, I didn't, you know, or if they had a question about something we discussed pertaining, because when they talk on an item, because when you're at the board meeting, it's not on the agenda. So things that aren't on the agenda, we're there, it's on the agenda after we've had the discussion. So that's how the flow was determined.
And I understand that, it's just that some of our study sessions go quite late, and people just then never get a chance to speak. And maybe we do it on the front and the back end or something like that, something that encourages people to come forward and speak and be heard. They're just, I mean, by the time we get done, 9, 10 o'clock at night sometimes, there's no one here. And no one's going to, especially if they've got young kids, they're not going to stay that long.
Or maybe after the topic that we just addressed.
That could be, I think it'd be, this would be a good discussion to have with Dennis when we're doing our governance. Because this is like part of why the reason that we talked about having him come back to see how things are working and that kind of flow. So in my opinion, this would be a perfect discussion for them.
Any thoughts?
No, the work session, the way we're doing it now is a different format than I'm used to, because we never used to have the public make comments when we had
At all,
discussion.
yeah.
They were there to observe, so it's a different process. So I find it would be awkward for the public to come and speak on something that we haven't had a chance, they haven't even heard what we discussed yet. That seems backwards to me to do. I understand having them stay till the very end and then come back doesn't always make sense either. So Melissa's suggestion might make sense, but I guess that, I'm listening to all this, so I guess it does deserve a discussion. So maybe when we were with Dennis, it'll work.
I like Melissa's compromise.
Oh, yeah, I mean, and
Maybe.
I think, yeah, and
Sound
I'd also
reasonable?
say that.
I like it.
Right.
I don't know how to fit that in, though, to an agenda. Do we add so many minutes in, or, I mean, that's up to you guys.
Oh, and I
I
guess-
think that's up to the chair
The
to
board chair,
recognize
yeah.
anyone in the audience that has a comment to make.
Well, and I guess I would also like to have administration have some type of comment on you know, how this is flowing. They're the ones presenting. So, I mean, I think in some ways they should have some, I also don't know if we need to solve it tonight, is what I'm saying. I kind of feel like it should be an offline discussion with Dennis. We have our thing coming up.
Would you see any problems with having public comment after each section? Each topic?
I would agree with Stacy that if we do have a board development coming up, this change, that we put in place, as Lee said, is different than what we used to do. So I think it's a great opportunity. And the purpose of coming back together with Dennis is to say, how have the changes been going? What are your ideas for improvement? And I think this has been a discussion that can move into that venue, which would make sense. And I'll make sure that my team and I talk about it to see what else we would add to the conversation if you would like us to.
We'll see, why don't we do the first meeting in January, and we'll see how it goes. And then I think our board study session with Dennis is before the 2nd. And that might be a good topic for Dennis, and then he can observe the study session after that, see how it goes. Does that seem amenable to everybody? Okay. All right, any other discussion about meeting procedures or formats?
I mean, I guess I just reiterate the fact that I think we need to make sure that we're giving administration enough time to work on our questions, that they're done in the appropriate time frame to give them time to work on them so that all the board members can get the feedback at the same time. Because there's points in time where we don't, like some of the board members don't even know that there's questions being posed. And so it kind of comes out of left field. So if we're going to have earnest discussion where everyone's on the same page, I think it's important that we follow those guidelines that are set up where we get the questions to them by 9 o'clock on a Friday morning.
And that's stated in our policy.
Correct.
I would like to ask a question about that, because sometimes we get updates to the agenda late on Wednesday or sometimes even early on Thursday. Is there a way to modify the 9 a.m. on Friday in order to allow us enough time to read and digest and send in the questions?
I think in those rare cases, if I may, Chair Wolf.
Go ahead, yes.
In those rare cases that we have had updates, I think that it would be reasonable through the day on Friday, but to get questions a half hour before a board meeting or on a Sunday night, that's more difficult for administration to be able to answer and be prepared for those.
Okay. All right. Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move over to in-service discussion. Do you have any in-service wishes for the year? I know we're meeting with Dennis in the beginning, or before the next study session, or before the study session in February. Is there any desire to have any other board development sessions? Or maybe we should put that off
You just
for,
wait until.
okay,
We
we'll
have
put
that
that off
discussion.
with Dennis. Okay. Seeing no other items on the agenda, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
By Melissa, do I have a second?
Second.
Todd? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes 6-0.